If you work in PR and you're responsible for tracking coverage, you have to watch this video. Hey guys, welcome back to this week's video. Thank you so much for tuning in as usual. Now, as I said at the very beginning of this video, if you work in PR or media relations, please spend the next 15 minutes with me watching this video. We're going to talk about the difference between tracking coverage and hits. Please don't say hits, I hate that word. And media intelligence and how it delivers a lot more value when you pay attention and interrogate that data. So stay with me. We're going to jump in. I have some slides that I prepared for you. And with that said, let's jump in. And so the first thing I wanted to share with you is this media intelligence maturity model. And this is something I've been working on for probably a decade or so, and it's shifted and changed it over the years. But it really does describe the way you might think about coverage tracking or media measurement or PR measurement. And it's not linear, right? It's not that you go from phase 1 to phase 4 overnight or over 6 months. But it really is meant to show the progression that you might take as you were thinking about providing more value to your business from a PR standpoint. So I'm going to go through each one, and then I have a couple of examples of what a more sophisticated kind of measurement framework and approach looks like. So let's first talk about tracking coverage. Now, this is something that you probably do every day, and a lot of startups are kind of in this phase, right? You demonstrate pretty minimal business value. You know, it's definitely siloed results. There's really no platform. Maybe you've hired a consultant. Maybe they have access to some free tools that they can use to pull data, but it's not consistent. There's really no measurement framework. So a couple reporting types might look like, basic media hits or kind of press release pickup, right? That's kind of the core basics of PR. Hopefully you're doing a little bit more than that, but that is kind of the bare minimum. Moving to the right, you have what I would call monthly reporting, right? And that's pretty self-explanatory. It's a dedicated coverage platform. Maybe you've invested in a muck rack or a meltwater or Cision, and you are tracking coverage every month or every quarter. You have PR teams internally or at the agency who are using the platform, but they're probably using it on demand, right? So they're logging into it, pulling data when they're asked to or when they need to. And some of the reporting types could include, the ad hoc reporting. The CEO wants to know, well, did we get coverage in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal? What's our share of voice look like? And share of voice is an interesting one. I'm not a big fan of that, but it is, common between PR teams to figure out, okay, when we look at our competitors, who gets more coverage, us or them? Then there's that, mention volume. So what's our mention volume look like over the course of 3 months or a year or 6 months? Is it spike in the off season? Does it decrease during, Christmas and the holiday season? So these are things that are really important that you can start to figure out, why is there, peaks and valleys and what's causing it and what can we do more to get more peaks? And then continue moving to the right, we have media measurement. Now, this is where you have established but basic KPIs, right? You're tracking your types of coverage, sentiment, certainly share of voice. It's consistent, but you're always exploring new ways to measure PR, right? You want to do better, right? So that's the first step, is wanting to improve the way you measure your media relations. Now, again, some of the reporting types could include that from a frequency standpoint. Maybe it's quarterly, monthly, or weekly kind of snapshot coverage reports. Types of coverage is interesting because that is kind of going a little bit deeper and saying, okay, how much coverage are we getting where we're like exclusive coverage, where we're mentioned in the headline or we're being mentioned and our competitors aren't being mentioned, right? There's that type of share of voice. There's coverage around, are there any executives being mentioned within the context of our coverage? Do we have any particular messages? Like if we want to be known for innovation or leadership or, cybersecurity, within the context of our coverage, are those keywords also being used? So it's a great way to, they call it message pickup. And a lot of the platforms do have and give you the ability to kind of track that within your coverage kind of ecosystem. And then just your overall sentiment, which is typically neutral for the most part, unless you're, there's, the cancel culture is a real thing. And a lot of times if there's an executive or, there's someone on the board who says something and, that whole story, that could have a severe impact on your sentiment. But it doesn't happen all the time, although it is happening a little bit more frequently than it was, 5-10 years ago. Now, moving to the right, we have kind of that deeper, what I would call media intelligence. That is the data used to inform and or prioritize your media strategy, right? You have a very sophisticated measurement approach. You're actually showing business impact. Now, a couple reporting types could include the basic web traffic. So is my coverage driving traffic to my website? Is my coverage driving traffic to a microsite, if that's the case? It's also tracking conversions and leads if you're selling direct to consumer. It could be more what I would call a topical share of voice or journalist engagement. Now, with B2B, it's different, right? You're not selling, someone's not going to, your website and dropping a data center into the shopping cart and then buying it for $10 million, right? That sales cycle is 6 months, 18 months, 24 months. And so, you have to kind of maybe build some indicators there that will help you determine what an ROI could be. Now, the thing with ROI is that it is a financial metric, right? You have the amount of money invested in a program versus the amount of money that you receive from that investment. Now, ROI is if you're not selling direct to consumer and you are trying to build a KPI machine, don't use the word ROI if it's not financially driven, right? If you do not have a financial metric behind your PR, it's not called ROI. It's just called business value or KPI or engagement, whatever it might be. It is not ROI unless you're able to track and put some type of financial metric within that KPI itself. Now, this is yet another model that I've been working on called the economics of supply and demand. Now, it's built on the premise of the real economics of supply and demand, but it's meant to understand through data and analytics. It's meant to understand the topics, the stories, the trends that are demanding the attention of your audience. Now, if you work in PR, which you probably do, if you're watching this video, then your audience is traditional media, right? You want to understand what is top of mind for those journalists at the Wall Street Journal. What do they care about? What are they writing about? What do they want to write about? Now, once you do understand that demand, you have to ask yourself from a supply standpoint, are we meeting the demand of our audience with our supply of stories through earned media, right? And you could do this a variety of different ways, but again, if you work in PR, you may not have ownership of blogs or website content or social media content, but if you do, then this is relevant to you. But what you could do is you can do an analysis on what the media is covering you on, and then ask yourself, truly through data, are we meeting the demand of our audience? Now, let's take an example here where we have an AI company. And, if you look at traditional media and maybe business and tech media are their priorities, and the data shows that they are writing more and more stories about cloud, scaling, and integrating AI. Now, that's great. Now you know what they write about through data, and I have an example coming up. Now, when you analyze your earned coverage, you see that most of the stories being written about you are around security, IoT, and data science. Okay, so now that you have this information, let's kind of peel the onion back and look at the data more in detail. Now, on the right, these are the media topical narrative drivers. This is sample data, but when you do an analysis, it looks just like this, where when you're analyzing the coverage, the headlines, the subheads, and the articles itself, what topics or sub-themes are they writing about the most within the context of AI? And in this case, the media is writing about security. That is the largest kind of piece of the pie. It's color-coded and it's sized based on volume. So security, cloud, scale, and digital transformation are those four kind of sub-themes that are being written about through the context, again, of AI. So you can peel the onion back and say, okay, well, let's look at security first. Well, you have cloud, data, threats, and privacy. Taking it another layer further, it's protection, AWS, privacy, and protection. Now, a couple things to note here is that the data in this data set is not mutually exclusive, meaning if there's an article being written and it's mentioned security and cloud and scale in the same article, then that article itself will kind of fall into all three of those data, the buckets, if you will. But when you're looking at pure mention volume, security is that language in the headlines that are being used the most, followed by cloud, then scale, then digital transformation. Now, looking at the left at the brand narrative drivers, this is looking at coverage that you receive from earned media. Now, the great thing about this is that there's some overlap, right? Security and security. So you have, and now again, this is purposely built this way so that I can prove a point here. The media, when they write about your business, they are mentioning security, cloud security, infosec, malware, network, etc. Right? There's a lot of overlap in the security topics and subtopics. However, that's it, right? You get covered around machine learning, data science, IoT. That's great because that could be part of your narrative. That is who you are as a business. That is what you sell. Now the opportunity for you is to then look at, again, what are those media drivers with and what are they writing about the most? You see cloud, scale, and digital transformation. You have to ask yourself, is there a way for us to kind of shift our narrative so that it's relevant to the media, but also still maintains integrity with our narrative? It's still aligned with how we want to tell stories, because that is the white space. That is how you get more coverage in the publications that are important to you and the ones that you prioritize. Now, again, it goes back to relationships, right? And I don't necessarily mean a relationship with a journalist. What I mean is when you can relate and speak the same language as your audience, in this case it's the media, and use the same words and language and key phrases, that then becomes an opportunity for you to be more relevant to them. That is how they relate to you when you speak the same language and words that they are interested in writing about. The other benefit of this is that when the media writes something, they are really driving that larger ecosystem, right? They create buzzwords, they create new ways to talk about digital transformation or the future of work or the fourth industrial revolution, etc. And all of these things are then adopted by audiences and how they search in Google. And so long term, if you can replicate the same language, keywords, and phrases that the media is writing about on owned media, then all of a sudden you can take advantage of achieving very high search results for high volume competitive keywords in the organic search results. So it kind of serves two purposes when you're looking at the audience, whether it's the traditional media or it could be your customers. It's the same concept, just different data source. Now here's an example of what I would call top technology publications by impact. Now in this case, we're looking at topics. I think it's the same topics around data science, AI, machine learning. And this just looks and starts to plot those business and tech publications that are writing about this topic. Now, there's 3 data points to consider here. There is the x-axis, which is volume of coverage. That's just counting. There's total resonance, and that is a social action, which I'll explain in a second. And then the size of the bubble represents reach of publication. So the way to interpret this is that when Forbes specifically writes about AI, machine learning, and security, the volume count is high, right? They have about 2,000 articles in this date range. They also achieved pretty decent engagement. If you look at the y-axis, right? Now, engagement and resonance is engagement. It's a like, comment, share. So when Forbes does publish an article on their website about AI, it's getting shared all over the place. People are liking it, commenting on it, linking to it. That is a resonance number. Now, also they're a very large company. They're a very large website. They have hundreds of thousands of pages and articles. So their reach is very high. And that is calculated by looking at unique visitors, right? So how many monthly unique visitors do they have to their website? Is it larger than Business Insider or CNBC? No, but it's still up there, especially when you compare it to that of VentureBeat or ZDNet or AI Authority. Now, AI Authority, as another example, is publishing a lot about AI. I mean, that's what they do. But they're a really small publication. They're fairly new, and they don't generate a lot of engagement, right? So this is a great way to begin to plan and prioritize which media publications we need to go after in order to drive the most impact for our business. Now, we can do the same thing with journalists. Now, we know that journalists are also very influential as individuals, and so we can start to track their mentions and their publishing behavior and look at the engagement and impression count of that content. So these are some of the top tech journalists who are writing about AI. Kyle Wiggers works for VentureBeat, and you can see here he's written published 300 pieces of content, social content, on his personal channels. He generates lots of engagement, but his impression count isn't as high as that of like a Sam Sheed. Right now, Sam works for CNBC, so he doesn't publish a lot about AI, but when he does, he generates pretty decent engagement, not as much as Tom or Kyle, but decent engagement. But his impression, he's reaching much more people. Now that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that, CNBC retweeted him and they have a large reach. It could be maybe they put paid media behind his content. So there's a lot of different variables, but this does give you a kind of an example of the influence of particular journalists as it relates to their publishing kind of behavior topically. So again, in this case, we're looking at AI, machine learning, and security. And if we looked at 5G, then we might have a whole different set of journalists and a whole different set of topics because not, Kyle and Tom, these are, their beat is AI and security. So that is just a couple examples of how you can use really, it's basic data, but it's data that you can use to make smart decisions, right? And that's really the difference between coverage tracking and media intelligence. Coverage tracking is counting. Media intelligence is using data to inform the future. So I hope that helps. And that, my friends, concludes our time together today. Thank you again for hanging in there with me for 15 minutes or so. Now, this all might seem overwhelming, right? I didn't learn this overnight. This is like years and years of learning from others. It's still learning today from others. I purposely hire people smarter than I am so that I can continue to learn. And that's actually a leadership quality that you should adopt if you can. And but it takes time. It takes a lot of trial and error. It takes a lot of testing. But you have to love it. You have to want to do it. You have to want to provide value for your organization. And when you can analyze the media and understand what it is that's top of mind for them, and then produce a story or narrative that aligns to that relevancy, then you have a much better chance of getting the coverage that you desire. So if you have any questions about any of this, I love talking about it. Happy to jump on the phone with you for 15 minutes or 30 minutes and answer some of those questions. But one thing to always remember is before you start any analysis or start tracking coverage, ask yourself, what problems am I trying to solve with this data? Or what questions do I have? What answers am I looking for to solve to answer those questions? And so again, if you follow that model, I think you can really build a framework that is going to deliver value as you measure your media relations and PR. So thanks again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week and stay safe, stay healthy. And until I see you next time, have a great afternoon. Bye.